for a little bit. Um,
Cool.
but thanks for joining, everyone. We are here with Harmony Holiday, poet, archivist, writer, choreographer, artist, all sorts of things. Very prolific, and yeah, super excited to have you here and do some reading, and then yeah, basically we're gonna do. Harmony's gonna read from an upcoming book, some new stuff, and then yeah, we're gonna do a little discussion and highly encourage people in the chat if you want to participate. I can. Harmony can't see the comments, but I can relay them, and yeah, I think that's it on my end. I'm gonna pop away and hand it over to you.
Sweet. Okay, I am just gonna, I can't see anyone who's in the chat room, but hi
Yeah, yeah.
everyone, thanks for coming, or I can't see who is here even. But I'm just gonna read some work from my new book, Mafa, that's coming out on Fence in the next couple of months, and then hop into discussion. Mafa is the Swahili word for Holocaust, and the word for the African Holocaust. So in the book, I'm personifying that word and riffing off it a lot, and it becomes a woman who is the protagonist of the collection. So I'll start here. Mafa is the only word for the African Holocaust, term for why we have a diaspora, terminal and terminable calling out of the endless lane of us. It's a society we mostly don't utter or even learn this word or its world. We don't acknowledge it at all as a phonetic event. Event number one, gatherer of stolen and learned rhythms, silent orphanage hymns. Ma, fa, ha, ha, gotcha, awful, ma, father, ma, fa. It's haggle and hobble of vowels. It's quiet, loud echo of mother and father and less and excess and access and after and before and awful and fault and falling and fuck, ah, fuck, that other fuzzy elsewhere, Mafa, its gust of captive beauty, its muted tunnel and order of itself, its sense of ruin upheld by a future, its performance of what is not but nothing but the black future. Mafa is the always ajar door to our understanding of our own bodies as real and not as feathers and needles, tense revocations, and floating gardens on the end of suffer. Mafa is everything that haunts us because we refuse to give it a name, the crisis whose submergence becomes subterfuge, the unpaid debt that accrues as frauded energy, fraught pretend transcendence. And so Mafa is our arrow root into the endless now and also the guardian of our impending exile from time. An exalted exile, cause for unhinged rebellion and celebration. In denying Mafa, we have forced it to govern us. Mafa is a coup. Mafa is eternity, tests on the loose. Mafa, a maternity test on the loose. Mafa is a code ducking its own undoing, a body that can always and never be reclaimed by the known unknown source. And in this story, Mafa is a girl, a woman, a black divinity, an epic hero who, in learning her name for the first time, remembers her deeds and the highest, most vulnerable function of them. She's also a killer, a slave, a fugitive, a mother, a sister, a child, a stateless hope, a mistress, a widow, a mourner, a priest. She is a girl who killed her own family, who witnessed the massacre of her own family and forgot until now, blames herself, wonders if she did it herself, even though she knows who did it. She is a heroic personification of the crisis we cannot escape without facing. And she is a matriarchy that follows our straight ahead gaze into herself. Look at Mafa, look at God, say her name. So the first section of the book is say her name. That was sort of the preface. And I'm just gonna go through this section. This is a story of a woman who has witnessed the massacre of her own family. Inspection at auction. Breasts full, middled, face radiant, comfort girl or in-house breeder, equipment ripe, unreconciled, no prior attempts. Stance bitter, ravenous, recoiled, hate makes her servile, buttocks firm, raised, wide, hiding style, plain sight, petite frame, tribal marking on the face above her, right upper lip, entropic indent, mouth full, careful, teeth so hip, so made to break the language open to fix her name and head home. Likelihood of inducing the owner's empathy or love or lust high. Likelihood that she has suitors of her own kind. Certain likelihood that she will take the whip, that they will take the whip for her or run away when held at gunpoint, unclear. Likelihood the president will date her on stage, unknown. What are you even saying? name Mafa, Mafa, meaning Black Holocaust, astonishing surrender, Ma'at, kick rocks, those are diamonds, beautiful walking graves, chase off their water skin, perfect, no blemishes, or permutations in pigment, hair coiled, star at the center of a tight afro, scar of a star, eyes unimpressed, still a little wistful, nose wide and aquiline at the same damn time, symmetry impeccable, dangerous, tone of voice bewildered. Likelihood she'll call Jesus daddy. What are you even saying? Mafa's tongue is in the world's mouth. This is a story of a woman who has witnessed the massacre of her own family and cannot tell if she was helpful in committing, if she committed, if she was always committing the crimes she is always witnessing, if the commitment to witnessing is a commitment to crime scenes, she watched them and held onto the memory of their killers so hard she cannot remember if they were her or hers, belonging to her commitment to seeing them, invited like company. And she, their hired Black witness, she cannot remember what she is committed to understanding. Mafa, how we spun in the sunny understanding, looking for a place to keep your memories like a body or belief system. And each one we found, we destroyed those women. Little bits of ride breaking with assembly line. I wanted the one who made a razor out of his jackals and carved stars in all our skulls. I dreamed of that neurotic Negus Van Gogh, so good with his hands, he cuts them off like wrong answers on a work song's bent wing. It's getting cool to lose our minds, spend time in danger, desiring shovels for singers in Mississippi. He asked me to kill him and leave him with Ruth by the river. Ever wonder who taught you that need is dirty? You be the backwoods ruby, mangling the new black fist into televisions who taught you dirty, needing some kinesis is built in longing for what oppresses. Filthy cargo there, he goes ashamed of being ready. We're crazy about his tough, sweet sound. So I'm just gonna finish going through this first section, a few more poems. It's hard because I can't interact with anyone, but are there people in the Twitch? Oh, lost, hold on. Okay, cool. Hold on one second, intermission, because my PDF disappeared. It's nice to read through. I've never read any of these aloud, and I've never heard how they sound as a section, so I appreciate the chance to do that. But let's pull this back up. One second. All right. Tragic cities. Her double vowel allows you to moan and pace with the everyday arrow and hug Willis's huge knuckle eyes. There she goes. Sometimes I confuse Jamestown, the place where slaves were docked and traded naked and inspected, flesh flung from yes and no, with Jonestown, the cult made up of brainwashed lunatics who took their own lives in the name of, I don't know. The world is full of magic cities. Martha smirks to herself, grotesque interiority, always ready to grit and flee. She fled after witnessing the massacre of her own family, wasn't sorry, left the bodies to rot that they may become her fertile land. Mitochondria. I'ma name my baby such and fuck your lazy syllables. Might have Khan dreamed up a praise name, her praise name. You know you ghetto if, and I love it. Dictionary claims it's the way we became human. Jaded program windows automatic. Roll up the soda on the side type DNA lesson. Made fun in the block with the sun and the double Dutch champion and the four wheels on wide feet hunting for fat ass that knows how to keep that rope a joyful scuffle. Almost sounds like the sea having been broken, but it's just sugar and carbon stuffed into aluminum, burning your teeth numb, the fast twitch muscle saying, hi, higher, nigga, it's Sunday. Call on the numberless threads of your one mazed identity and swallow them whole, bent dial tones and call my baby flying. Had you call me Mafa after the rock, cry out. longer want to lick you off the sides of my mouth and spit you out in rhymes, would rather murder you and do my time in doula numerals. I counted tunnels there in the funny junkyard, counted the minutes I could spend in open air, forced myself illiterate of American values, and it was lit neurotic. Again, with hip teeth, again, and a Thad Jones lisp. We needed to get outside, even if we run up on a liquor store promising I ain't never coming home no more. Looting, illusion. Like someone who can hear into someone else's hearing, not a spy, but a captive, clairaudient binge listener, we fake our deaths with her now. How about that boat cult pyramid drifting off its fix into forever? Mafa wants to learn her name before she leaps there. She's ignored the massacre of her own family, blames herself for their fate, is that vain, and then one day isn't. Hums, I should care, finds spite where the terror was, and prayers for Malcolm, whose corpse smiles at her. She mutters hallelujah. Mafa's moments of revelation. Rub the mirror with such cotton it grabs your face in cave light and grins. This gringo family is so naive, they let me clean their looking glass. I place my arms of wooden dreams where the medicine once lasted for years in variations of pale aggression. It's fun flushing the white pills maelstrom. It's fun touching the crushed what if. Diverted to see something spinning in the middle sea like we and coming out alive, sedated by praise like this house full of fools letting the slave peer into its drift glass. It's fun to taste castaway salt on my gums, maroon gums, swollen, ballooning, lunatic happiness inside these two illusions. Motherless empire. These are my obsessions, seduced into second childhood, not because I want to correct something, but because fast is more seductive as a whore than a wife, and the word whore in orbit is a praise dance like the ones we did in the mirror with Aunt Viv, nothing referential the second time around, no referees from commercial enterprise, nothing to soil the crop, the house, the bodies, her second skin, phallic hypocrisy. I'm a sweet baby slave looking for water in the fraying dust. Sometimes I feel that way and am that way. One piece of cloth for every piece of cloth I weave into the bleach and the sun and stain and the circus juice of berries. Everything that is mine this time I am making. Rebirth can only come of this desire to take what's yours and embroider it in the code of first witness. This is my godless land, my country, my obsessive fantasy about the corner of a missing smile found in the owl's eyes, smirking, calling the mouth a liability, cracking the night with that accusation, weeping out of pity for the devil until what was convulsive split to slow moan, boat song, song of the recovered darkness, song of how we longed for that dayless day, and secretive song, song of how we killed it in a public square while its soul ran off into the eagle's mouth. There is power. There is a power that only silence chases in a language of pure gesture between dance and birth, and no nation can claim it. Have you ever been the mothered skin of early sky and bondage, bound to a land as you torched it? And I'll read one more from another section, and then we can get into discussion, hopefully. I don't know if you guys can hear how loud LA is all the time, but there's background noise of sirens, which is always fun. All right. You don't know what it's like. Even James Baldwin defends his oppression, even though my mother's mother called herself a nigger, something, something, triumph, something, something, why God do we gotta suffer? Sulfur just under the skin, a blotch of tinsel yellow says so. It goes, emptying retribution and jizz kisses, and smarter than you. Smart enough to be miserable and keep it to himself like an intelligent prize racehorse, so wise and broken into podium minutes, moan, hint, hit the tone in it. Self-hate is a form of self-love too, he says next, Bible and blue and rude and blue and laughing the truth out the way evil is guzzled outward and cackle on black and white shows. All right, I'll stop there because we have some time to talk. Thank you. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it's great to hear the new work. Uh, well, yeah. Coming back to reality. Yeah, thanks for talking into the void there. I know it's kind of
Yeah, it's I can't see
bizarre
anyone,
to like
but
do a
it's chill.
performance to zero feedback and nothing. But
It's chill.
um, yeah. So do you want to kind of I don't know what you want to start with? I mean, I had sent you just kind of like some thoughts, basic loose uh, ideas. Um, I'm trying to pull those up. But yeah, I mean, I think something I wanted to ask about was just your archival work.
Mhm.
And you run an archive, Afrosonics archive. And yeah, I think just, I mean, there's a lot to talk about in terms of archiving. Uh, I think my experience is like working the museums here, you know, dealing with their kind of backlogs of like native objects that are poorly categorized and logged and yeah, kind of like corrective archiving in some ways. And yeah, just kind of curious how you think about that work or
Yeah. You mean the work going on in Tulsa? Or
no, your
oh
Afrosonics
my god.
archive.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Um, yeah, it's been like a long, ongoing, slow, steady thing, but I started it like 2014 or 2013, and in response to finding all of these jazz records that had poets reading on them who had never
mm-hmm,
published their work, who were just often career musicians who wrote poetry and wrote volumes of poetry but never published it. So I've always been interested in looking at that like lost script that kind of is treated like oral history or denigrated as nothing or just left to go out of print. So that's what that's about. In the spring, before all this COVID stuff happened, I was going to open a space for that in LA that since is, just wasn't worth like maintaining that
right,
since it can't open until God knows when. So
yeah.
so it's interesting now with what's everything going on to think about how the digital archive works, and I've been thinking a lot about like how to reclaim archival work that is now just sitting in university libraries that even people who attend the universities and stuff can't really access. So
Right.
I feel like that's where attention needs to be directed to not just let those things go, you know, inaccessible and unused.
Yeah, I was just curious how you like came across. I mean, you have like a big trove of records, and then yeah, because it's they're buried. It reminds me of like people who work with like CIA documents
Mm-hmm.
and like the FOIA requests and stuff that they need to go through.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, yeah. I'm just curious what's gonna. I've started to write like a letter asking universities to release specifically like Black archives that no one can access right now. And I hope to distribute and get people to sign because I just want to see more people using that work in general. This feels like a kind of space has opened to allow people to think about that because now people are paying to go places where they can't even access research material necessarily if
right,
it's like,
right.
you know, so
That's interesting.
yeah.
Archiving for COVID. It's like um. Well, I guess I mean one like concrete question, or it's not concrete at all.
Mhm.
Can I ask you to read a couple poems?
More poems?
Well, I was uh,
Hmm.
in a Blue Way, and then the attempted lynching of Jasmine Richards in Hollywood Forever, and well, just this idea of martyrs and legacies,
Hmm.
and you have this quote of talking about Angela Davis talking about Asada Shakur's legacy, and it was interesting reading that like in the middle of like
Everything
people,
going on.
yeah, and people
Yeah.
freaking out. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't even know if I have Hollywood Forever. I might have it online somewhere,
it's
like on a PDF. I don't know if I have a copy.
I'm like I don't want to
Um,
read your poems for you.
I want to talk about the quote. Do you mind telling me
Well,
which quote you're referring to?
yeah, yeah. So okay, well, there's this one line. They're the martyrs we know by heart who flooded our subconscious minds with
Hmm.
the. They're those who are so effective and advanced and otherworldly that packaging their legacies could uproot Western culture as we know it and leave us in that land where the sun kills questions.
Hmm.
And and then this idea of Asada Shakur's legacy being specifically kind of moving her as like designating her as a terrorist and
Yeah.
the kind of like I guess criminalizing of her legacy and uh,
Yeah, I guess in that book I was kind of exploring martyrdom as a kind of like suicide or like what people were really after when putting themselves in those positions besides just saving something about humanity, you know?
mm-hmm,
Um, and Asada is interesting because she isn't a martyr in that sense. Like she kind of has been able to live two lives. So I feel like she not enough is really like people don't think enough about her in terms of like being a non-traditional form of someone who was able to be a revolutionary but also didn't get killed and fled and lived a completely different life, whereas someone like
uh-huh,
Angela Davis is like in the institution still and kind of in a way Angela Davis is her own martyr because she never really got to get out of um, her brand, you
that's
know.
interesting.
And while Asada's like most wanted and like she can't even come up from hiding because they might capture her and bring her back here or something.
Really,
Um,
is she in Cuba? Where is she?
yeah, she's in Cuba, and I think since there's more of like a search for her now, she really is not coming up to
Really.
say anything as much. I feel like it's like known that she's just like not about to talk at this
Mm-hmm.
point, not with Trump in office, because who knows what would happen.
I'm curious, yeah, who if there are kind of other people in that vein that you're thinking about, like these potent legacies that we should tap into or investigate, or I don't know.
Mm, I mean, she's definitely one. I always think about, I mean, Amina Baraka, who's still alive, who was
Right.
Mary's wife, is someone who we have as a resource who people don't really think about enough, maybe. Sonia Sanchez,
Sonia Sanchez.
people who like lived through a lot of this and were active and members of communities that were engaged in resistance, but who now no one really looks at them as much as like Angela Davis or something
Mm-hmm.
for um, that's kind of what the archival project is about. It's like voices that would otherwise, not people wouldn't really consider them as part of that like, chorus when they think of like Black revolutionary ethic or
Right.
radical ethic or avant-garde or other bullshit terms people use.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of like jazz musician poets were better poets than the page avant-garde poets who are made to learn about.
And that poetry
Um,
only exists on some from like a live recording or
yeah, for the most part, they didn't make books, and that has to do also with like publishing. there aren't many Black publishers. It's a world that to break into it, even like every Black poet whose name we know had some affiliation with a major university at some point.
Okay.
You don't really find like everyone from Amiri to Langston Hughes to whoever, even like Allen Ginsberg, if you want to think of like white beat poets, like they were all going to Ivy League schools. Nikki Giovanni went to Columbia. So it's like there's this, I don't want to call it myth, but there's kind of a mythos that like there's a street poetry that was published during the Black Arts Movement or something. But these people were all like middle class Black people going to Ivy League schools. So that's not what jazz is. A lot of jazz musicians like went to the army and then were able to go to college or just study jazz in the clubs and then didn't hone their craft in institutions. So it's hard to break into publishing when you don't know those channels, I think.
And is that like a similar? Is that because like if you wanted to be a poet, you knew you had to go to school in that, or or the way that poetry gets separated from other
disciplines? Or
yeah.
I think it also has to do with like who people's heroes were. So like a jazz musician, like Miles Davis's hero was Charlie Parker, and he was playing on 52nd Street. He wasn't in the university; he had never gone to one. He came straight from Kansas City, but like for a while, Mary's hero was like Frank O'Hara, or like so like people had these heroes that had gone through academia and poetry because it's so traditionally academic. In a sense, like Black poets were chasing the path of their heroes, maybe even if they were other Black poets like Langston Hughes or something like that. Even Zora Neale Hurston. I mean, you find for whatever reason, writers tend to have to go to school more than musicians, for better or worse. I don't think it just happens that way in a sense that like you're more affiliated with academia because it's not as widely received. Like you can't become like a famous you can't become like Billie Holiday or Miles Davis.
There's not like a pop poetry circuit.
But maybe there would be if we refuse academia more. I don't know.
Do you want to talk about jazz?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I'm like tempted to show people afrosonics.com.
Yeah, you can pull it. Totally up to you. I'm gonna let you steer.
Okay. I mean, I guess I was thinking. So yeah, okay. I'll share it with people. Well, I'm like, what's gonna happen if I navigate out? No, just go to afrosonics.com if you want to, people, but be warned. But
it's not Tumblr.
Right, no, that Tumblr is yours, and then, but I actually navigated to the other Afrosonics, which was this like horrible image.
I don't even know what it is, honestly.
It's so bad. It's like, it just made me think about like being invested in jazz and the way, like, so many of my associations with jazz as like someone not at all invested in jazz are just these like kind of very perverse like mainstream.
Whoa, what is this?
It's so bad. It's
I need to de-affiliate myself. Wow.
I'm sorry to bring that into your consciousness.
No, it's fine. No.
It's just I'm the kind of these like perverse associations. Like we had a tour of the Jazz Hall of Fame at one point here in Tulsa, and yeah, it was really upsetting and just kind of this total depoliticization. It's a white-run, white-operated Jazz Hall of Fame. Just the myriad ways, like La La Land, and what it's like being invested in jazz in.
It's hard. I mean, it's so co-opted. First of all, most of the musicians didn't even like that term and like openly hated the term and like consistently said it, but like no one, even like people like me and current jazz musicians, are still using it to denote that whatever we think of as collectively improvised black music, but
Uh-huh.
most of the musicians just hated it because it erased the training that they had gone through. It made it seem like, again, like they were, even though, these people didn't go to conservatories or whatever, mostly because they weren't allowed to. They were rehearsing every day and trained classically and had, apprentice great musicians in their hometowns in the South or wherever they were originally from before getting to New York. And jazz erases all of that and makes it look like a bunch of like black dudes who did heroin and went in the room and came up with something, wild.
Uh-huh.
And there's that, and then it's just corny. There's the other part. Like now, it's become,
Yeah, Woody Allen
every
music
jazz
has been.
festival is pretty much like a white soundtrack for like white bourgeois people with good taste.
Yeah,
Mm,
I guess I'm curious if that is that like is there something specific or it's like there's white people appropriate everything, but
yeah,
is there a difference or specific strain of appropriation that happens with jazz or like
I think so. And it's interesting. Like, definitely, I think it gives people more license because it's more of a niche. Like, somehow the white people who appropriate jazz feel like they're a special type of white person who's
uh-huh,
smarter than the white people who like appropriate Drake or something.
right,
So there's this sense of like you're in the mix, like jazz record collectors specifically. There's a lot of like digital blackface with jazz heads, to be frank.
right,
Like online, it's easier to like put up, and that I think it affects music because a lot of the listening and like the people who engage with jazz are trivia oriented because it's been appropriated by that like specific type of white person. So right now, as a black woman, I'm working on a biography of Abby Lincoln, and I'm going back and forth with people about how I want to structure the biography. And it's like traditionally jazz biographies, not autobiographies, because those are usually more anecdotal, but like a biography is like this happened in 1957 and at this recording date these two people like fell asleep and you could hear whatever snoring on the back end of the right, like it's just like so much trivia.
uh-huh,
And it's definitely patriarchal. That's one thing, just as a woman from a woman's perspective. And it's also rarely does it create like great atmosphere or writing, but the attention to minutia makes it so that like if you're a white appropriator of jazz and you know that minutia, you've somehow like transcended the race boundary because you can come into a conversation and be,
you can have a million
for the listening,
facts.
yeah, it's very white, like the conversation that happens around it. Because then people like, if you're like a jazz lover like me, who's like a lot more chill than that, and you come into a conversation and you don't want to talk about like bullshit trivia,
Yeah.
then it's like people disrespect your knowledge as a listener because you don't approach it in that jazz biography way. And so it's hard. I mean, it's a music that it shouldn't be called that, so that's like a big issue. And then it shouldn't be treated as like a idiot savant type of listener type. You shouldn't listen to it because the record is rare or
Right, right.
a lot of the soul is taken out of appreciation for it. And it's also like one of the only like remarkable exports America really has. And so the way it's used like is interesting because that affects jazz musicians and everyone's like messed up by it in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
It was that jazz was a CIA project, right? It wasn't like along with
I
or
feel
I
like,
mean it not like
yeah, the
led, but
ambassadorship of it
yeah.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, like sending Louis Armstrong
Yeah.
out into the world to like promote jazz
I
and,
heard about that,
and
yeah.
also um, recruiting jazz men for the army to be in the army band and things like that, which is, even John Coltrane was in the army band. So it's
Right.
like a lot of uh, governmental support for, I don't know. It's a mess,
Yeah.
honestly. But it also affects, I think, for me as a writer, like ideas of genre and form, because I feel like it's one of the closest things we have to a pure black form. I think people like Amiri talk about that, or even, I mean, you can see it in Ralph Ellison, who tried to be a jazz musician. Um, but it like becomes unusable in a way because it's so co-opted, or it's hard to really like not that you can't use it, but I hate the term like jazz poetry. Like I use
Uh-huh.
it and I use it, but I hate it. It just denotes something that people can understand. But as a practice, like, you know what I mean? It's just corny. Like and it doesn't let us talk about improvised poetics and like improvised Black thought in language that mimics or is in line with the music, because the music is so trapped in these other spheres in a way. And by talk about it, I mean like teach about it and be educated about it and think about it without like having to reference white Western forms.
Right. That was a question in the chat. What are some alternative terms?
Black classical music
Black
is
classical music.
one. Like that's what Roland Kirk wanted to try to call it.
Huh.
And I think that's a good one because it forces you to. I mean, the term classical is like it's rooted in class. Basically, it's high art, and jazz is rooted in like the parlor house. Like it's meant to be like low. It's like, I mean,
Mm,
church people hated jazz music. It's like the secular, dirty,
begin.
accessible street music. And yeah, at least it's, or it when it first debuted, people were like, this is, fast music. So yeah, I think Black classical music is somewhere, at least like a good pivot. And then from there, we need to like collectively try to figure out, because also classical in general is like a shady term.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. I mean, yeah. Speaking of not referencing Western.
yeah. So you could just call it Black music. I mean, a lot of people were just like, call it Black music, but that, then it's
Is
like,
broad. I mean,
yeah. Um, I mean, one of the biggest issues with this society is the emphasis on genre. I feel like it's prevents so much holistic thought,
totally.
because it's a music created by Black people, and that also is helpful because when you see like Bill Evans or Dave Brubeck or something, like you have to question where jazz becomes like where white artists were used to make it a crossover music, like with every genre of Black music, and calling it Black music kind of allows you to do that
Right.
in keeping like race records versus Elvis, like it's
Yeah.
in that of that.
My favorite. There's a Steely Dan origin story where they were at Bard College, and apparently how they met is like Donald Fagen heard the other guy playing, and he said, "That guy sounds like a black dude,"
Oh my
and that was enough. That was the beginning of their band. And uh,
that sounds right.
I don't
Common, I bet. Like, yeah.
know. And
Yeah, it's a mess.
yeah, I think of them as well. I mean, that kind of like, te- yeah, it just feels more pronounced in jazz. Like I think that kind of
Mhm.
tension of like it being a genre or form being appropriated is
Mhm.
like almost all artists have to deal with that on some level. But yeah, it feels like it would maybe drive me. It would be this like it feels hostile in a way, like to work in that field. Um,
I think, yeah, because first of all, it's like a man's field. Like, there aren't many women who can write about jazz.
uh-huh.
And in general, there aren't many. Like, Amiri has that great essay, Jazz and the White Critic, because it's like what really happened was you got people like Leonard Feather and Nat Hentoff who became famous critics just talking about jazz, whereas no Black people were really given the platform to write about it. So it automatically was positioned as a white world music for white, educated bourgeois people who was like a sympathizer with Black causes, but really just wanted to consume Black cultural production,
Right.
and not feel guilty about it and feel like they were doing it like appropriately with the right set of morals and the right amount of distance and the right amount of not having to be involved in anything else about Black life. But
Yeah.
you
I'm wondering about the contemporary parallels of where that's happening.
mhm.
Um,
I always think about this Nina Simone anecdote where she wouldn't perform one night because her parents weren't allowed to sit in the front. It's like shit like that.
uh-huh.
That kind of shows like how are you a white jazz spectator, but that's happening where you're
Right.
paying to buy it and you're good with it. What does that even mean?
Right.
Um, Yeah, I wonder what are some parallels now. I mean, everything. I think
Yeah,
everything kind
no,
of follows those channels. But you see it. I mean, look at the New York Times. Like hip hop critics, they're all white men,
uh-huh,
and so it's a similar thing where the music that people want to consume and not feel guilty about consuming Black culture that they haven't lived, they put like a learned, like
the ways
says
we
all
when
the
the
white
ways we
guy.
validate something and yeah, bring it
Mm-hmm.
into the mainstream or
Yeah, it's like when this white guy does a profile of Lil Baby, now
right,
he's a rapper. It's like, huh? Like
yeah,
and it's all really goes back to how it affects our ability to think about language because it's all in the language use around that artist. It's all about like how that artist is brought into white thinking and speech and written language. I think in a way. Um, and I guess it happens with poetry too. That's why this book, Mafa, is so concerned with this one word and how
uh-huh,
opening up and really having a word for something um, opens up your consciousness to it and really admitting what it is. And I can kind of, as I'm going through and finishing putting it together, I can feel how jazz musicians might have felt because, like, to not have something to call what you're doing is similar to
uh-huh,
the experience of realizing that until really thinking about this word this much, there was nothing. There's a slave trade and there's like slavery. Those are words we have, but we don't have a word to talk about all the people who died. We don't have. So when you don't have the right word for something, you just don't have a way to think about it.
mm-hmm,
And I feel like that's what like a lot of the work Black poets have to do is try to figure out how to mine this language for the words that allow us to take back our thinking about what we make and how we live. Like our actual gestures being trapped in a language that's hostile toward them.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading your I'm trying to pull it up, the essay for Bomb magazine.
Mm-hmm.
It, yeah, the just pain, killing pain. Was
Oh
just
yeah,
that kind
that.
of basic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was also yeah thinking of that in the context of this jazz appropriation and the you talking about the way you're writing about black pain and the commodification of black pain, and
Mm-hmm.
if that is like in this embedded in jazz in a way, and this and it,
Mm-hmm.
I mean I do think I it just feels so like I'm stuck on the Jazz Hall of Fame in Tulsa because I feel like it's a really particularly egregious institution in the
Yeah.
community because it is I mean yeah the Tulsa race map it's directly adjacent to Greenwood but it's not in Greenwood
Mm-hmm.
and
And it's all white run.
it's I mean I don't know if it's entirely white run but the director
Yeah.
is white, the guy who gives the
Yeah.
presentation and the
That's
band,
crazy.
the band that played for us was all white,
Oh my
and
God. Wow.
and it's like this is theoretically one of the institutions that should be this kind of amazing, like Black Wall Street happened
Mm-hmm.
in Tulsa, and there's I think that's something I'm interested in connections with your archival, where like there isn't. We don't really know. We talk in Tulsa, we're aware of the race massacre. We don't talk very much about like what actually was going on Black Wall Street, and that did coincide with like the vaudeville circuits and stuff, and this huge moment in live performance, and yeah, the artists who came from that time and are kind of lost, and I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what happens with that kind of appropriation is that white people end up being the people who make money on it. That's
Right.
why people get so mad, like even with the museum in DC when they hired the white director and everyone was pissed. It's like,
Oh,
huh? So like this is like a black art form and you can't find a quartet of black people in Tulsa
right.
to play their own music, like to pay them instead of these white guys. or to pay a black. I think that's what really also gets frustrating, and that's like part of what capitalism is trying to do in a sense. Like that's beyond the appropriation into like how
Mm-hmm.
um, black artists don't start out as black capitalists, and so to learn at a certain point in your own making that that's what you're expected to also navigate is, I know it was a shock for like Miles. If you even look at the history of jazz, like the people who ended up making the most legacy type money came from middle class or upper middle class backgrounds. Like Miles's dad was a dentist and owned a bunch of land in St.
Uh-huh.
Louis. And so he instantly knew, like, somehow he just had this sense of money. And when he realized like rock musicians were making a certain amount for festivals, he upped his fee to like 50,000 or something. He was able to do what white people did
Wow.
because he was like from money in a sense, or he had a certain amount of land wealth that he understood how it was maintained and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas someone like Nina, who just came from the South and very religious family in North Carolina, like she ended up, a lot of jazz musicians died broke or
Yeah.
in debt, and a lot of people were making money and still are off those same musicians,
Right.
and it's not their families. So that's really one of the sad things, and that's what I guess a jazz funeral for Uncle Tom was more thinking about, because it's such a complicated like back and forth between, no one would call Miles Davis Uncle Tom for getting his money, but like you have to have a certain amount of assimilation in you to know even how you would profit off of your art, and usually that involves, I mean, as I've seen in my own life and my own family and with people I know who are in the music industry, it involves like making a bunch of white friends and having like being that Dave Chappelle version when he had his breakdown, but not ever having the breakdown if you can help it.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like never saying no.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Dave Chappelle? I.
I didn't even realize. Yeah, he just always comes up. But
Yeah, no, I remember, I mean, I follow you on Twitter, and like I do appreciate your just general commentary, and yeah, I think I saw a while back you wanted to organize a conversation between Fred
it's Fred
Moten
and
and
Dave.
Dave Chappelle, and I
I
was
was
like,
so serious.
I
But
know,
like,
I was like, that sounds really interesting.
yeah,
I don't
I think
know.
it would have been, or still it could happen. I don't
Uh,
know.
yeah, I think I was just well, also, I want to ask if there's anyone in the chat who has anything they want to say. I know there's a Sun Ra. There's a whole like performance night tomorrow, a tribute to Sun Ra, and that was something
Oh,
my friend.
where?
It's through American. Our friend Naima Lowe, who's an artist in Tulsa. She's reading a
Cool.
poem for that. American. I don't have it right now, but that was just kind of one of those figures. I just came across American or Faroa, not American Faroa, Faroa Sanders.
Oh, yeah. Fair Numbers. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, kind of this legacy. It's I don't want to keep you forever either.
No.
Soundamerican.org. Thanks, Jessica. Um, and yeah, the enduring legacy. You've written a bunch of poems about Sun Ra, and
Mhm.
and written a bunch about him, and just like he is one of those people that maybe like Angela Davis, that has like stuck around and kind of stuck with
Mhm.
people and continued to inspire. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any
Sunrise.
thoughts.
Yeah. They're both from Birmingham.
They're both
That's
from
the thing.
Birmingham.
Yeah. Um,
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
Sunra.
What's
Hmm?
I was, what's no continue. Sorry.
Oh. I think Birmingham radicalized a lot of people at a certain point.
Yeah,
Even though Sun Ra, people might not think of him as a radical, he pretty much was. He just hid it behind other stuff, basically, like
eccentricities.
shiny suits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and he was so well trained. I mean, he's interesting because he kind of grew up middle class. Like he went to college and had like he wasn't poor growing up. let's say, but he produced most of his own records. Like he rarely signed with other labels. He was always, there's a million like business cards that are floating around of like Sunny Raw Records, or like he had like 50 different names, everything. And some of his records you can only find like, 100 copies or something,
Right.
because he's making them himself. Yeah, I feel like anyone who like is truly radical and able to find the resources to stay that way ends up owning their own thing somehow. He was also a poet himself who never ended up publishing. He's in the archive a lot because he has so many volumes of poetry that just never came out, that were like stuffed in his records or on records and stuff like that. Yeah, I think he'll be forever misunderstood for sure, which is probably necessary. I think that like he wanted to be, but
I guess that could be part of the appeal of the forever mystery.
Yeah, he's one Black musician who can't be like, no one can play his music like him. You can't co-opt him. So
that's interesting that they both came out of Birmingham. Yeah, in that vein of radicalizing, which seems very out there, and yeah, it's not like what we associate with the South or
yeah. Well, I think he really was visited by aliens. Not to be oaky and shit, but like he got a visitation, whether it was some like dream and his DMT was popping that night, or he was really visited. He clearly, some shit went down, and I don't think because he was like I don't think he would be like that if he hadn't had some kind of otherworldly experience, whether via his mind or other sources. Whether he tripped up. I don't know if he found some DMT in Birmingham.
The cow patties.
Yeah, something went down. And it's so, like, he's so sure of it, like, that I don't know.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm flipping through the various things in front of me. Yeah, I think we talked about most of. I was curious about. Yeah, the Dave Chappelle performance, and I was interested in your critiques of. I thought those were, and maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
The one from during quarantine?
Yeah, his most recent one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when it first came out, so much keeps happening that it's like those things feel like you take them to heart for like a few days and it's like,
they're just
more
like
happen. Yeah. But yeah, I just thought, I still think like Black music has a long way to go as far as like respecting women and considering women, especially like male driven. Well, I guess he's not. I associate him with Black music because he hangs out with Black musicians, but I guess Black culture generally, but just the fact that he didn't really mention women at all, like Breonna Taylor or anything like that, stood out to me in a sense. And his solipsism about like, do you know how I felt as a Black man, seeing like, how do you think Black women are, just no consciousness of that whatsoever.
Right.
His mention of women is usually like, yeah, I cheated on my wife, or like, yeah, I fucked Azealia Banks, or like, yeah, like he's very dismissive. And it's interesting this week because it's definitely redemptive that he like went to see Kanye, but again, Azealia Banks coming out saying like, with the discourse of both of them being bipolar, and Azealia always getting treated like a crazy bitch, like we could use like what's going on with AOC today, like. Whereas Kanye, everyone's like, be careful, protect him. His wife's out here, like, protect him. Even though he's saying, like, she stinks or whatever the fuck. He's, like, talking mad shit. And she's like... But, like, Azealia, people just talk shit about her when she breaks down. There's rarely people who also say, like, have her... Like, even when she said she got with Dave, people tried to like act like she. It's like clearly she did. He's a hoe, and clearly
Uh,
like he used his opportunity and got with her.
well, she's
Um,
kind of a hero for the Elon Musk Grimes. I mean, like
yeah, I love her.
she legitimately has like broken like firm talk about like unspoken codes of
Yeah, I
uh,
really like her. And she's never doing it. I mean, Kanye is doing it. Like, I know people who know him, and I was talking with someone who does, and I was like, you should reach out to him. And they're like, yeah, he's just trying to sell his album.
right.
And it's like, um, a lot, it always coincides. He does have this issue, but it often coincides with his releases of his albums, whereas
Right.
Azealia just happens to be at the house minding her business and decides to like break code,
Uh-huh.
which is much more commendable. Although they both like, but just back to Chappelle, it was cool that he went to visit Kanye, but also that was a very I don't know. There's a lot of testosterone in that footage of him visiting. Basically, it's just like a bunch of dudes.
Oh yeah, I
It's
haven't
something
seen
funny.
it.
Like it's just so dude. You know.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, I think I was. I was when I watched his performance. I was like, how has no one articulated this timeline before? Like,
mm,
obviously it hasn't. It has been but it just that hasn't like been a mainstream kind of public. And I thought that there was like kind of parallels between how you structured Hollywood Forever in terms of you're talking about like the rest of Miles Davis
hmm
and kind of going, but it was. I mean, yeah, it had its flaws. I just think
It was still, yeah, there were good elements of it for sure. I just thought, with everything, it's like it wasn't any more profound than any individual Black person's individual experience of what
right,
was going on. It was just that he's Dave Chappelle and he said it, and he is good at saying things,
right,
but it doesn't. Um, it's not like he was saying anything we weren't all feeling. It's just he has a platform.
yeah. I guess it was
Uh,
nice to see someone talk about Christopher Dorner in a public.
to talk about who?
Christopher Dorner on a
Oh,
mainstream,
yeah,
in like a logical.
yeah. I need to watch it because I don't know if I remember everything he talked about.
Yeah, no, I mean we don't need to go that into it.
Yeah, but it was interesting.
Well, and yeah, I guess wrapping up. I mean, again, I was introduced to you as your sound guy, and I'm not a
Mhm.
poet or
Oh
coming
yeah,
from a poet background.
back in the day. Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any questions in the chat from people from the poetry realm that can ask more intelligent questions than I can, and or if there's anything you want to kind of touch on before we go.
Um, is anything else I can? Yeah, let's see if anyone. I can't see the chat, but
Yeah, yeah.
I
Uh,
welcome
I'll
questions
let you know.
because that might be.
I was wondering, could you read that song cycle poem you posted the other day?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. Um, in this, I have like a lot of different sections of this manuscript,
Okay.
but I'm gonna look for it.
Is that from Mafa?
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. But are there any questions while I look for it?
Any questions, chat? Not so far.
Cool.
Are there any upcoming poetry events online that you're particularly excited about?
Fred and I are gonna do something that I will be super excited about
Awesome.
in early August. Yeah. But it's gonna be more, I think, talking about music,
Mm-hmm.
which it's hard to do poetry readings on Zoom, I think, or on online,
Yeah.
because it feels like you can't see anyone. So I
Right.
like, don't just read a whole section and like not look up or say anything, but
Right.
It's a weirder,
It
it's a
does
weird
raise the
thing.
question of the difference between a poetry reading and an audiobook when you're.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. With all my sister's a singer and she's been doing shows on Zoom, and she says it's really enervating because you're putting all you're singing is a lot
Yeah.
more energy, and you're putting all that out and you're getting like nothing back.
Yeah.
You're just like, and it's not that much different with poetry, but it's just harder, I think, than when there's people.
Yeah, it's been hard to figure out what is translatable and what's really ends up just being degraded by trying to make it work on
Yeah,
Zoom.
and I think the only way to figure it out, uh, sadly or not, is to actually have the experience of, like,
Yeah.
I've heard, and I think it's mostly fine. It's just like it's not. Are people enjoying it? Also, is a question. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
is it
It's
a
hard to say.
valuable thing to do, or would it be better to talk about the work? And what is this poem?
Here's a poetry question.
Okay.
Um, how for you does improvisation and poetry happen? Where is your relationship to improvisation and poetry as craft? From Chelsea. Hello, Chelsea.
Hi, Chelsea. Um, Improvisation. I feel like that's how I compose poet. Like I believe that improvisation is how, at least for me, poetry should be made. And I mean, it's the best poet. I don't know, but I don't think there's any scripting of poetry. Obviously, it's not like a novel or a play, or
Mm-hmm.
there usually isn't storyline and narrative, even though sometimes there is a suite of poems or a specific topic you're working around. So I feel like, um,
Maybe I am also asking about listening to.
um, yeah, I mean, one method that just comes into my writing a lot, or how I come to poems, is through listening. I think, like, I'll listen to archival things or music and then end up kind of accompanying that as the poetry, which is something that I love to do
Mm-hmm.
because I think it allows you to listen really closely, but also hear your own thoughts a lot closer when you force yourself to improvise and not um, set too strong of like a guiding intention with where a poem is going to land. And it forces you to consider language more and how it sounds, which I think is something that we would gain from jazz the form if it hadn't been so co-opted and we were able to look at it in a more natural way in relationship to poetry, because I feel like a lot of what we'd be looking at is like what you're trying to do as a black thinker to get back to a pure sound of how you, like, James Baldwin talks about, like, he went away from the US because he needed to get back to the cadence and the beat of how he had sounded before he had been co-opted himself through education and things just being in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And to get back to that, he needed Bessie Smith and he needed to be out of the American dialect and dialectic of, thought and sound. Um, and I think music and listening while you write allows you to privilege sound, which a lot of, if you do MFA or whatever, if you're doing like bullshit like workshop critique, a lot of people say like, don't focus too much on sound, which is, I think, exactly the opposite of what might be,
I'm sorry, I gotta step away for 1 sec.
yeah, um, helpful for like Black people, um, when thinking about how to write more like naturally, or what you hear, I guess. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find that. It's coming back. I'm gonna look for that poem he asked for while he's away. Oh, good.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm still looking for this poem. Um, I but hopefully that answer made some kind of sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Um, Here's this poem. Song cycle poem. Golden light pace sigh, road of air to ride it on, wheels so smooth they melt, bicycle like Scully. That was just a section of it I posted online, by the way. Bicycle like Scully to the head now, all we have uncontained is the universal psychosis, kissing screams and chase scenes mimic the dream of future exercises. Psychotic, dying is psychotic, the West is having its psychotic break fueled by a coveted kind of protein or dead meat we call a virus, viral load. Is psychotic, doing a thing that goes viral is psychotic, the West is in the middle of its psychotic break, takes time for press briefings and shopping, righteous indifference, tepid indignation, digging up corpse pictures. This is me, it's still me. We promise edging into a new persona is psychotic. Arriving at the end of empirical evidence is psychotic. Lynching is psychotic. Camouflage is psychotic. Singing is the West is breaking into song. Haptic psychosis. Time, crystal, knowing is psychotic, but we all know how we long for this bridge of days between the end and the myth of mythocratic thunder boasting slow Athens, scooting into the voice of its enemy to strangle, please, and watch the deep purple moan. Hope is psychosis, and to ignore it is, and to light it on fire and realize you lit yourself on fire and feel hopeful there, and launch out a window into the cold grass. It's spring. The psychopaths are asking to be reborn.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sweet. Any last questions, or should we?
I think that might be it.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for talking today. And yeah, it's good to see you too.
Yeah.
And
Fun. And hope everyone got something from that. Thanks
I,
for coming, whoever is in there.
yeah, yeah. Well, stay safe in Los Angeles, and
Yeah.
yeah, looking forward. You said Mafa is coming out in August.
Probably more like September now. I'm trying to like time it away from everything crazy that's going on because it's
Yeah,
not really a time to promote a book, especially I don't know. Yeah, but it should August, September.
sure.
Very soon. I'm excited about it because it's like fresh and new. It'll come out while it's still fresh, so that's always fun.
Very exciting. Okay, well, have a great night, and thanks
Yeah, you too.
everyone for watching.
Yeah,
And yeah,
thanks for hosting and congratulations on the new space. I'm
thank you very
um,
much.
yeah, excited to follow where it goes and hopefully come there in
Yeah,
real life.
yeah, we got to get you out to Tulsa.
Yeah, can't wait. All right, ciao.
Okay,
Bye.
night night. Oh, goodbye everyone. Thanks for coming.